Welcome to Practical Access. I'm Lisa Dieker.
And I'm Rebecca Hines.
And Becky, who do we have with us today?
Lisa, I'm glad you asked. Today we're going to be talking with Dr. Samantha Mrstik. We all know her as Sam. And Sam is a professor at Georgia Gwinnett University, and she has a lot of experience to share. She has taught internationally in 6 different countries. She's a former ELA Teacher of the Year. She did her dissertation in Botswana, and she's kind of an all-round content expert and international expert, and I can't wait to hear what she has to share. So, Sam, welcome, and can you give us a little overview kind of on where you are professionally right now and what you're thinking about in our field?
So first of all, forgive my voice. I'm getting over a bit of a cold. So I am at Georgia Gwinnett College, which is a part of the University of Georgia state system. And I am teaching special education, specifically in the area of mild to moderate. We have a small program with, we have right now 4 professors. And we have 2 programs, one for what we call the traditional student. Although Georgia Gwinnett, we are not known for traditional students. We usually have the non-typical student, which is what makes us cool. And I'm also working with our para program. So we have a cohort of students who are paras in Gwinnett County Public Schools who are working on their bachelor's in special ed with us. And I've put a lot of focus specifically on that. That's kind of my very cool and fun program is working with the paras. I love them.
I love it. Well, and we've known you for quite a bit of time, and I love the fact that that's what you're doing. It's really who you are. You really are that organic person who loves to make a difference at that grassroots level. I wonder if you might share with our listeners kind of your personal journey of what got you to where you are today. And I'm going to, just because I know you well enough, I would love for you to share about the experience you had in being an all-boy classroom. I think that's always kind of an interesting piece of your story, if you don't mind sharing.
Sure. So I can honestly say that I was born to be a special ed teacher, like literally, because I literally was born with a disability. So what that means is I was diagnosed with a learning disability in my first time in 3rd grade because it was so cool. I stayed for a 2nd year. And I remembered I hated school. I mean, like not just a kid saying that. I hated school. It was terrible. I hated going there. It was boring. So, I learned that it would be really more interesting if I entertained the class. And so I did, and I was really good at it. But the teachers didn't find me quite as entertaining. And that led to my diagnosis in 3rd grade. What I found is growing up in special ed, and the time period would have been in 85 when I was diagnosed, it was an all-male background and me. And so it was interesting when you grow up in an all-male background in elementary school, you just have to learn what classes are like and the culture is like. And that's honestly where I learned that I could be more entertaining than not in classes. So I went into middle and high school also I went from resource room to self-contained. And in high school, I was in a completely self-contained environment. My learning disability is primarily in the area of math, as you can hear from talking to me. Raspy voice or not, my communication skills are pretty good. I'm very capable of reading and writing above grade level. However, my math has always been about 2 standard deviations below grade level. And that had been consistent throughout elementary, middle, and high school as I was retested and reevaluated. And although I didn't enjoy the school aspect, I was put in classes that were probably under my level for language arts. And because they were under my level, they bored me and I became even more entertaining. And that led me to my career choices later on.
And I know for you, having been around you for several years, you had a tipping point where a teacher kind of took you aside and said, "Let's talk." What was that tipping point that kind of moved you from the class entertainer to actually getting a degree, and just reminding our listeners today that you somehow figured out math because you have a doctorate, a PhD,
Yeah.
which means you had to take a few math classes to get
I did.
there.
They made me.
Yeah, they made you. So,
They did.
so what was the tipping point for you?
When I was in high school, I had a set of special ed teachers who would talk to me quite honestly about, they'd pull me aside and say, "Hey, Sam, do you think you might be a little bit different? I mean, you seem to not have any problems in reading." And I just, by that point, would blow it off. I wanted to go to work. I liked my job. I didn't want to stay at school all day so I could do OJT, on the job training and leave. So I kind of blew it off. But as I got older, I realized I didn't hate books. I had never even read in high school, my entire high school career, one Shakespearean play. And I graduated, barely, and I went to community college, and my tipping point was truly there. I had someone at Florida Community College at Jacksonville, which is no longer, who was in charge of the disability services at the time. And it was him, really, that said, "You're not too bad at this stuff. You just have to, I don't know, try to read something you like and see if you do." Turns out I liked it. And Oprah was right about To Kill a Mockingbird. It was a fantastic book. I read it like when I was in my 20s for the first time, but I started reading and reading and reading. So when I decided to pick a major, I went to the University of Central Florida and became a special ed teacher. And my emphasis was in SLD, because at the time you picked an emphasis. And then I thought it was only natural to teach language arts. But the true love came from the department head at Oviedo High School. She at the time said, "You were robbed." And I said, "Of what?" And she said, "Of the best literature in the world. And you were so capable and no one told you. And so I'm an old lady who doesn't know much about SLD, but I'm going to teach you privately my AP class." So every week, she and I would go to Chili's after work and have a beer. And she would take her AP stuff, and slowly but surely, as I was a teacher of special ed, I was learning through her privately how to teach English.
Sam, that's a great story, and so many things about that really resonate. I think any of us who have worked with kids with problem behaviors in particular can see exactly that, how behaviors are so often just avoidance, or I would rather look bad than stupid if I have a disability, a learning disability in one particular area, etc. And so often in my career, I have come across kids who just are not given, again, the word Lisa and I use all the time, access to that high level content, and so I really appreciate you bringing that to the forefront. And I'm so glad that you could find a colleague later on to help really bring all of that to life for you. So just thinking, there's so many great things to talk to you about, but from what you shared, can you tell us one thing you would recommend to those teachers about kids who are, receiving special ed services, especially if they're in a self-contained setting? Like, what is one takeaway? I know you're training teachers now, but what's the message you want them to resoundingly hear?
We hear you. We hear you. And what I mean by that is we're pretty bright. The students with LD, the adults with LD. And the fact is, we can read your body language. and we know what you think of us or don't. Maybe, and I remember when I was a kid thinking, well, this teacher is whispering about me and I know it. I can hear that. And I remember thinking as I grew up, I remember being in an IEP meeting and someone telling my mom I wouldn't graduate high school. So I always tell my students now, especially when I speak in general ed classes, we hear you, general education teacher. We get it. We're smart enough to understand. And we take that seed and place it right back in the back of your head, and you just remember it forever. I am 44 years old and remember the teacher that told my mom I wouldn't graduate high school.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Great and deep messages. Well, and one of the things, Sam, that is also unique about you is you have found a way to travel, but you didn't just go visit countries like other people who go on cruises. You were like, oh, let me go teach here for 8 weeks or here for 16 weeks, and let me teach in a container if I remember right, and let me you've done a little bit of everything. So I have two parts to this question. One is just, what did you learn from that in just a short couple of statements?
Okay.
But what should we also be aware of when kids with disabilities come from other countries to us in the United States? So what did you learn there, and what should we be cognizant of no matter where the kid is coming from?
I learned a lot, obviously, but the different cultures treated students with disabilities quite differently. And I feel like going into the next part of your question, when a student with a disability comes from a different culture, that could mean a lot of different things. And it's worth digging into that culture just a little bit as a teacher to figure out what disability means in their culture, because I have found, regardless of where I am, disability is treated very differently. And although some places in the world are becoming more Western in thought, at the same point in time, it is not always the case. So I would say that if you have someone coming from another part of the world, and I'm not saying Western Europe, but if you're coming from Southeast Asia, if you're coming from parts of Africa, it is worth, and even South America, it's worth the time to dig into that culture. Or even better yet, if you know someone who comes from that culture, dig into that. Ask them. It'd be really interesting what you might find out and how much that will impact the student that you have in your class.
Great advice. Great advice. And then I'm going to move to the language arts teacher in you, teacher of the year. What are the best things you did, or you believe you're training your teachers to do, for that kid who has checked out? To Kill a Mockingbird is going to kill me to read. I have lots of thoughts about what I can write on this paper, and they're not things you should read. So what is it that you would be your go-to strategies in language arts class for that kid who's just done?
Well, one is just an overall teacher strategy. If the kid doesn't like you, the kid's not going to do it. So personality and really knowing your students, what they need and who they are, is probably number one in any class. If they don't care about you, they don't really want to write the paper quite as much. Next, if there's something they like, you can tap into that. And that's a pretty easy one too. I know as a teacher, I wrote grants for magazines, and I taught in Oviedo, so I had lots of magazines about trucks. My subscription of truck magazines were shocking. Oddly enough, the Orlando Sentinel, when it was still printed, my guys loved getting that. That was kind of their thing. They would dig through and get the sports page. Fine, they read it. little things like that. They would actually bring the postcards from magazines that they wanted to me, and I would order them for the classroom. So I had a kind of a drive where I would say, okay, everybody bring in the postcards of the magazines you want. Sometimes it would be when we were reading classic literature, we would have the accommodated versions, but then we would say, okay, what does this kind of remind you of now? So in other words, it doesn't need to be old and stuffy, because let's be honest, you can relate it to Kill a Mockingbird to the news today. And the older student, I think, I also had what I called the no kitty lit promise. The older student doesn't want to read middle school books, and a lot of times students with lower reading levels are being told that they have to read young adult novels, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with a young adult novel. There isn't. But I would say if you want to read that in your reading class, cool, but we're not reading kitty lit here. We're reading the stuff that is interesting and more adult.
As someone who also taught language arts, Sam, my first degree in first teaching was in that area. Those are all great pieces of advice, for all kids.
Yeah.
Not everyone, not everyone enjoys the same thing, and lots of classes can push kids harder and give more choice for sure. So taking it to the other side, and now let's think about that area that you weren't an expert in and didn't have a passion for. What could math teachers have done differently for you so that either you wouldn't have been, and I don't know that you were, but you might have been math averse, because it's not usually, you don't love always the things that you're not great at.
Right.
What could math teachers have done differently when you were a student that might have helped shape, who you were as a learner?
I remember as a kid, I would have to have, and probably everybody remembers this, the 50 math problems you would have to do. Right. And prior to receiving an IEP, those 50 math problems would take about 3 hours every night. And that was hell, because I also have ADHD and I can't sit for very long. And now you want me to do what? And I hate it. And then my mom is threatening my life. And it was all very terrible. So I would want the math teacher to know, do we really have to do 50? When I did get an IEP, I was able to have every other problem. You would do evens or odds, which is common. But even that would take 25 problems, took still an hour and a half. It was a lot. So that could have made me like it a little more if I could do a little less. I still, eventually got it. Manipulatives worked. I eventually got there. I remember there was a high school teacher. He was a coach, a football coach. And he was maybe the best math teacher I ever had, because he did for his football students he called it like lunchtime study. And he would invite everybody in, including me, including all of his students, to do homework. And regardless of what the subject was, he helped. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to this, is stupid. But then I couldn't do my homework, and I was not going to bring it home because I had way too many social obligations. So I needed to get this done. So I started going, and then I kept going. And it kind of surprised 10th grade me a lot. But now I realize this dude gave his time. And it was something, now that I look back as a teacher, it was nothing. But he made the effort. He went out of his way. He's the one, this football coach, sat there with his book and showed me on a calculator and did it during our lunchtime, and it made a difference.
So, as you think about, I think that's a great point. And a lot of us probably have that experience and know kind of intuitively that it's those personal connections that keep kids interested. And you've alluded to that several times. So my final question for you is, as you look at what's happening right now, and kids are online, so those personal connections are going to look different. Yeah. And I think that no matter what happens, when things get back to, air quote, normal, it's probably at best a new normal. What do you think is the key now to creating and maintaining relationships with kids when things may be remote?
It's really, really different. And, I think about it all the time because I have currently student teachers who are in the field, and I'm watching them upload to a program called Go React, where I'm watching their videos, their Zoom videos. So this is a different world. And we talk about this sometimes in my classes, how to establish relationship with students when you're not with them. So one of the things that we talk about is, if you could make it special for them in some way, shape, or form, can you, have a group or just a talk with that particular student? Can you send an email or something that is personalized just for them? Can you give them personalized feedback instead of with everybody? We talk about breakout rooms in Zoom and how we can use that in teaching, as well as how you can break out with different groups and talk to them in a smaller group atmosphere. Technology is hard to use as a teacher with a class of however many. Many of my I watched one just the other day. I'm thinking of one particular student, and she's doing, tell me this isn't hard, kindergarten. And it is kindergarten for kids with disabilities. And 2 of them are face-to-face, and 2 of them are on Zoom. So I'm watching her video, and the kids on Zoom are squiggling all over, and the kids who are in the actual class are squirming all over. And she is just a pro. She's one of my parapros, and she's just a pro. But part of what she was doing is making sure that the kids she made sure they had her attention. Mm-hmm. I like the way you did this. I feel like, do you want to talk so-and-so? I mean, she really just spent a lot of time acknowledging them.
That's great too.
So my last question for you is thinking about that 3rd grade Sam, and she's sitting in 3rd grade twice, as you said so eloquently in the opening. What would be your advice to the 3rd grade Sam sitting out there that are struggling, and the advice to their parents, now knowing what you know today?
So to the kid, I would say, I know it feels like you don't have this. Been there. But if you could just try, if you could just take breaks, little chunks, and infuse some exercise in it, because that's something I needed, it could really help you go far. And it's really hard when you're in 3rd grade to look at yourself as a professional, how many years later. But the reality is, I think I would like to tell myself that I know what people say, but not all of what people say are true. And to the parents, I would say, if you could talk to my mom, she would tell you it was hard and I was difficult. But the fact of the matter is, no one, even including my mom, expected me to be sitting here with a DR in front of my name. However, there's a reason I do, and part of it was solid guidance from my mom, and the fact that she attended the IEP meetings. She made sure to support the teachers and be present and make sure that the IEP was followed, and learned, specifically in 85, that when this was all very new, she had to learn what all this stuff was. I mean, she was a National Honor Society type, so this was very new for her. So the more you know and the more education that you have on it, the more meetings you attend, the more questions you ask is better.
Great. Well, thank you. As always, it's such a privilege, and we could go on and on, maybe future podcast about each country you've been to visit, but we really appreciate you taking this time for joining us. And folks, if you have questions for us, you can send them on our Facebook at Practical Access, or you can send us a tweet at Access Practical. Thank you again, Dr. Mrstik, with the DR in front of your name, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Good to see everybody.
Bye, Sam.
Bye.